Hi, welcome to Actual Spinster. Haven't done this in a while. I have been reading, which is nice. I wouldn't say I've been really able to like direct my reading aside from some of my like PhD specific stuff, but even that's kind of a struggle. But I did manage to read quite a few things in January, to my surprise. And I mean, I think like some of that is because I was helped by audiobooks, even if I didn't read all of the book via audio, if that makes sense. So yeah, I'm just going to talk to you about what I read in January. The main theme is Discworld novels, which carried into February. But the first book of the year actually that I read was this book, which is called The 39 Avoth Malacha of Shabbat by Rabbi Baruch Haidt, which is kind of like this like Orthodox Jewish like kids book about Shabbat, but it's quite like dense. But there's like quite a lot of text, especially at the beginning. Anyway, and since I heard about this, I've been like really interested in reading it, and then I finally tracked it down, and it's obviously pretty short, so I did. It is really interesting, and I think like quite a lot of the illustrations are really nice. Actually, yeah, there's one page I especially liked. Yeah, this is when everybody's getting ready for Shabbat, and I really like that, especially this one. That's nice. There's people making challah here. Yeah, basically there are different types of work that are forbidden on Shabbat, and this goes into all of them. So if you were to observe Shabbat in a rigorous and orthodox fashion, then this would be like a useful document to kind of help you know what to avoid, which is like a lot of things. I did actually find the beginning bit kind of confusing though. I didn't think that they explained things particularly clearly, but there we go. The next thing I read was a Discworld novel, and that was Maskerade by Terry Pratchett. I do have a copy of this, but I can't seem to find it. This is like a Phantom of the Opera spoof. It also is thinking about disability in some, I thought, interesting ways, and also some flawed ways, but some, like, I don't know, I felt like it tried really hard, which I liked. It's also the penultimate book in the Witches series of Discworld. I can't remember what number that makes it, maybe 4th, maybe 5th. So now I've just got one left, which is Carpe Jugulum. Yeah, so Maskerade, like I said, is this Phantom of the Opera spoof, so it's all revolved around the opera, and it follows this girl called Perdita X something. Perditax, as people call her in Lanka, as she goes to Ankh-Morpork to become an opera singer, because she's really good at singing in kind of like a witchy way. And the witches of Lanka, which is like Granny and Nanny, then they no longer have their like third Magrat in the same way as they do, because she's like queen. They think that she's like witch material, and she doesn't really want to be a witch. She wants to be like beautiful and an opera singer. And yeah, and there's murders in the opera house is basically what's happening. There's a ghost. Yeah, there's like a disabled character who is like he experiences ableism. You can really tell I'm fatigued. I couldn't think of the word ableism. That's unlike me. And he does experience ableism like within the text, and also, you know, like because he's obviously like intellectually disabled, I believe. Like that is what Pratchett was like going for with his character. And then there's some really interesting stuff around like masking and like unmasking, and I don't want to spoil the plot, so I won't tell you exactly what happens, but yeah, if I had more spoons, I probably would have made like a video about it when I read it, but I didn't. But which, you know, I don't think like entirely is an especially like liberatory idea about disability and disabled people's place in the world and in society. But I did think that without thinking massively about the sort of metaphor or the practice of masking and unmasking in terms of disability and in terms of like intellectual disability and sensory differences in terms of like, I don't know, neurodivergent masking, I thought the book was sweet in the way it tried to make space for a disabled person. Maybe I will make a video about it one day, but because I feel like I can't say very much. Yeah, it's very funny. I do think Terry Pratchett is just like one of the most funny men I've ever like read, and like he is like basically the only man aside from maybe like E.M. Forster and like maybe one or two others, fine, who I love. Don't tell anybody I said that though. I'll take away my man-hating card. Yeah, I think Discworld is really, the books themselves I mean, I think actually Maskerade is one of the ones that has maybe more depth to it in terms of some of its thinking, but like, yeah, they're quite easy to read and they're often really funny and fun, and for me they were really hitting the spot in January. The next book I read was this graphic memoir, graphic autobiography, graphic biography. It's a joint sort of maternal biography. So this is The Soviet Daughter, A Graphic Revolution by Julia Alexeyeva, who is Ukrainian, like American. She moved to Chicago when she was a kid, I think. I can't quite remember exactly when. And she had a great grandma, pretty sure it's great grandma, it could be great grandma, but I don't think so, who's called Lola, who was from Ukraine and was born in sort of like 1900s. So she really like lived through a very, very tumultuous time period. And I think after she died, Julia found like a book that Lola had written of her life story, and then she turned that life story into this graphic biography. It is black and white, and I know people sometimes don't like that in their comics, but I thought it quite worked for this. It mostly focuses on Lola's life, but then there are kind of like interludes where we look at like Julia's life. It's also about being Jewish. I guess it's less about kind of like religiousness to that and more about Jewishness as like a cultural identity, and kind of also like a sort of hidden national identity in a way, or like there's something about sort of national identity that is maybe like fraught and questioned within it. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. There's this like one scene that fully like blew my mind, where there's like an anti-Semitic like hate crime happening, and then like Lola like calls out to her dad, who then the people who are beating him up like go into his house, and then they see how poor her and her family are, and they're like, oh my god, this guy has nothing, we're gonna leave you alone now, which is just like fucking wild. What I also liked is this ends quite like hopefully, which I feel like, considering a lot of the very intense and violent subject matter, you maybe wouldn't expect, and also because I think a lot of people who either are Soviet Jews or are descended from Soviet Jews, like they can often sort of very virulently disavow communist and like leftist and socialist politics because of like the familial trauma and violence that they experienced, which and obviously that's not to say like this book isn't like pro Stalin or any of that, but it's more just like it has some hope for like leftist possibility and futurity that I thought was nice. So basically like every other book I read was a Discworld book, kind of. So the next book I read was A Hatful of Sky by Terry Pratchett, which is a reread. It was like maybe my fourth reread. I love A Hatful of Sky. I listened to this one on audio, but I have previously read it. Oh, there's some stuff in here. What is this? Oh my gosh, there's like some stuff from this convention that I organised a couple years ago when I was like 19, and then we took feedback from people, and there's like some stuff, like people's favourite things in it. Daisy's art talk, everyone at the zine workshop, hearing everyone's different experiences, and meeting friends for the first time. Witches panel, which I guess is on point for being in A Hatful of Sky. That makes me feel all tender. So A Hatful of Sky, yes, so this is the second book in the Tiffany Aching series in the Discworld series. It's about Tiffany as she goes to be like sort of learn more about witchcraft and learn more about being a witch, and she goes to a woman called Miss Level, who's, I can't remember where, not on the chalk anymore. I guess she must be in Lanka, but I don't remember if they say. And yeah, it's just about like her learning, and there is this like kind of creature called the Hiver which is sort of looking for her. It's very much just like about care work and about like the grunt work that is like looking after people, and the kind of failures in community care, and the ways that taking on care work, being a carer, can be obviously like meaningful and transformative for both you and the people that you care for, but also really difficult and like upsetting and negative and isolating. And there is a way that like this kind of represents how people really need witches, which i.e. kind of like midwives and yeah, like care workers, basically community care workers, but also kind of then feel like a lot of contempt about the work that witches have to do in order to look after other people including people like themselves. And then also thinking about like being a witch or a care worker and feeling kind of disgruntled and upset about your position and like how people treat you and like what they want from you, and how nobody is care. It seems unfair that like you have to be the one to step in to fill the gaps of care, all of which is like so valid to feel. And yeah, I think it's like a really wonderful book. It's definitely one of my favorites in the series, in the Tiffany Aching series, obviously, as well as this world series generally. But yeah, it was a really nice thing to like reread when like my brain just like wouldn't work and I was having a bad time. Next I read The Puritan Princess by Miranda Mullins. This is like a book that the reason I found out about it was because I listened to Not Just the Tudors, which has like exponentially increased a lot of my TBR, especially in terms of like historical non-fiction books. But this is a historical fiction book, and it's set in, I guess it's set in the interregnum, what we call now the interregnum, but I don't think anybody knew then it was the interregnum. Yeah, it starts in 1657. Actually, I guess it doesn't, because it is like a prelude, but that's in the future of the book. It's not in the future of my future. Yeah, but it's basically 1650s. It's at the court of Oliver Cromwell, and it follows his youngest daughter Frances and just kind of like her life. You know, she isn't like technically a princess, but she's also like not a princess. And it's in that kind of stage where Oliver Cromwell, so I don't know how much this stuff will ring a bell, but like after the Civil War in the 1640s, like throughout, Oliver Cromwell obviously was really successful. They chopped off the head of Charles I, and then everybody was a bit like, well, what should we do now? And they tried a bunch of different strategies, including like military rule, but that didn't really work. And then Oliver Cromwell was kind of like the protector of the whole of the UK, which is sort of nominally, well, I guess it's not nominally, it's like ostensibly not being the king, but really he was the king. And then he was also offered the crown like explicitly, but he refused it. And so we're kind of in that time period of him like deciding whether he wants the crown. So yeah, it's about kind of like court politics. It is also a romance, which like I could always do without, but like it was okay. Like it wasn't terrible. I did think that the romance like could have been a lot worse, I guess. And what I found interesting was the court stuff, the sort of like historical moment that this is about, and then also it is very focused on like the familial relationships of Oliver Cromwell, I guess, and you know, he had like many daughters. I think he had like at least 5 daughters. I think he had at least 4 sons, but most of them died except from like 2. Maybe he had 5 sons. Anyway, like he had a really big family, even with the deaths in it. So it is focused on that, on kind of like Oliver Cromwell, the family man, as opposed to like this very kind of like strict one-sided view of him as like a political actor, which he is too. That's not to say that I would say that particularly antagonistic. It's just that people don't often focus on his familial relationships, in part because he was surrounded by women. You know, like he obviously did love his wife a lot, and then like all of his daughters were there, and like his, you know, so Richard, who's the son who did succeed him, but obviously that failed a lot, he was kind of around, but he lived a very different life to how Oliver Cromwell had lived. And then Oliver Cromwell's other son, who was alive around this time, Henry or Hal or whatever, he was in Ireland. So mostly he's surrounded by his like women relations at court. Like it was good. I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it so much that I was like, I'm gonna read the other one in the sort of loose series, which is actually like a prequel to this one, but I wanted to start with this one because this was like the first published, and I thought that would be just like the best place to start. And obviously, like, you know, or at least I know the history around this, maybe not in as much detail or depth as this, and there are a couple things I was like, wow, is that really true? Like I knew enough to know what was going to happen, but that didn't like spoil the experience for me. The next book was another Discworld book, and that's Guards, which is the first book in the Guards series. No, what are they called? The City Watch, that's what they're called. I have kind of been putting off this series for a while, but also like with me falling back into Discworld, which does tend to happen like December, January and February. It seems to be like those are my Discworld months every year. Yeah, I sort of have decided that I am just going to probably read the whole series, which I didn't previously think I would. I was more just like, I'm going to cherry pick the ones that I care about and the ones that are about like women basically. But then I have heard that the City Watch series is pretty good, and I also, yeah, I guess like the one series within series in the Discworld series, how many times can I say series, that I have considered not reading much of are the like the academic, you know, the Wizards series, because they do tend to just all be about men, and like I don't particularly like the Wizards, but I probably will end up reading all of them. Like, let's be real, I think I just like Pratchett a lot. Like, it is what it is. I am also kind of working on a video that I started before now when I was even more fatigued, and then I haven't sort of finished it, but maybe I'll finish it today and then cobble it all together. But because I got like a bunch of Discworld books in January, and I kind of wanted to like talk about them all, and also specifically like my thoughts about the series. Maybe hopefully that will be up soon. But anyway, back to this book. Yeah, this is about when a dragon is attacking why am I struggling so hard to say it? Ankh-Morpork. Sam Vimes, who's like the leader of the Night Watch, which is the worst of the city watchers, obviously. He's like one of the main characters in this, and it's sort of like he's the one who I believe we like follow forward, as well as a couple other people in his City Watch group, and a new recruit called Carrot. And it is kind of like also playing around and spoofing on ideas about fantasy stories where the hero comes to defeat a dragon and then is okay. It was enjoyable. Alright, so then I read The Rebel Daughter by Miranda Mullins again. So this, yeah, like I said, it's a prequel, but it came out second to The Puritan Princess. And I thought it was really interesting. I'm not sure which one I preferred. I think I probably preferred this one, but I did really enjoy this one. And I thought that considering how religious the main character is, specifically how like Christian the main character is in this, I think that Miranda Mullins did quite a good job in like demonstrating that in a way that wasn't like excessively annoying because she is quite like a judgmental main character. This one, instead of following the youngest Oliver Cromwell child progeny, follows the eldest. Actually, I don't think she is the eldest. She is the eldest sister. She's not the eldest of all of them. Although she might become the eldest of all of them. I can't quite remember how that works. And her name is Bridget. And yeah, this is set during the 1640s. So before the kind of establishment of a court or Oliver Cromwell being like anything particularly important to the country at all. So we kind of see that, and Bridget becomes like an army wife, so we also see much more of the sort of like difficulty and the struggle, and the way that Charles I like washes around and tries to negotiate with different groups but basically doesn't really, and sort of like the religious dissent that the New Model Army was. So that's also one of the reasons why Bridget was so like emphatically Christian and Puritan, sort of. Can't really remember if she would consider herself a Puritan. I don't think she would, but she was very, very religious. One of the things that Miranda Mullins said on one of the podcasts that I listened to with her on was that like Oliver Cromwell wrote to her and was like, remember, like, life isn't just about religion, like, you know, have fun, which is kind of an interesting perspective on Oliver Cromwell. Anyway, so this is much less about court politics but much more about like army politics, and also sort of like religion. There's some interesting stuff about women and sort of like religious dissent, non-conformist movements at the time that like held an important place for like women's voices and women's position. But yeah, it's also kind of a romance, but the romance is like a lot less romantic because of who it's about. And yeah, it is shorter, I guess, so that's maybe also why less to say about it. Yeah, this book is 370 or so pages and this one is 420, so there's not that much difference in it, but I would say that they do feel like kind of different. I think also a key, I mean, it is true that there is grief experienced in this, but I would say that this book feels much more about grief as a general kind of influence and like participant in day-to-day life in more of a throughout way than with this one. This one, it's sort of like it comes at a particular point and then it stays, whereas this one, yeah, it's sort of marked a lot by that because of what happened historically and how many people in the Cromwell family died and that kind of thing. And obviously living in a civil war, like obviously there's going to be death is going to surround you. And then the last book I read was Graceling by Kristen Cashore. Is it Kristen? Yeah, Kristen. Which is a YA fantasy book that I have actually been reading since like, I don't know, June last year. And I finally finished it this month. I haven't been reading it throughout that time. I read like some of it in June and some in August, and then I don't think I read it for a while, and then I read the last chunk in January. Yeah, I actually ended up really enjoying it. Like, it is kind of like this funny mix of like derivative and interesting. You know, there's some stuff that I found personally very interesting because there's mention of sort of like abortifacient like herbs and things, because like the main character starts a sexual relationship with a man and you know, I don't think I've really read a YA book, at least not from this era of YA, which is, it's quite an older YA book too, that sort of like talks like that. It almost felt to me, as someone who hasn't read all of these, but Mari has spoken to me about them, so I feel like sometimes I kind of know the vibe. It almost felt like a young version of like a Robin Hobb novel because of those kinds of like details and the thoughtfulness with which the world was created around the characters, rather than just focusing on like what actually touches the characters. One of the reasons why it's just very like, of course it's like this is a YA fantasy book, you know, the main character, like, people have graces where they're like gifted with things that they're really good at, you know, like it could be fighting, or it could be like cooking, or it could be mind reading, or it could be prophecy, or whatever. And the main character is graced, she's this young girl, and she's graced with killing, the ability to kill people really easily. Graces show up because people have a different coloured eye than the other. I think it's generally gold. I don't know actually, I think it's just a different colour. And then they're treated, well, it depends on kingdom to kingdom, because this is quite like a drawn out fantasy world with different kingdoms, but generally people with graces aren't treated particularly well. People are not trusted. The main character is called something that sounds like Katniss, but it's not that. Katza. Yeah, she's like a lady, and she is used by her uncle, who is the king of one of the places, to be this like really horrible dealer out of violence. Because of her grace, she's used like a sort of tool. But I would say that also, in part because of what Katza's grace is, because she's just like incredible at fighting, and also because of like the instigating moment of her grace coming through her, which was that this like man in a dinner kind of like tried to touch her or something, and then she like killed him. I think that was right. I can't quite remember the details now, but because I read the first bit so long ago. But it does mean that the novel kind of takes on violence against girls especially, but also just violence against women in general, to be like a key kind of part of what is going on in the world. And there's some points when it's like explicitly thought about, and like the main character being like, I wander around and I see this girl who's obviously scared of this group of men in a tavern, and I just wish that like people, like girls, were taught to fight and things like that. And I don't know, I feel like when I described it like that, it sounds really stupid, but I thought it was really meaningful. And I think because often I find that there are some stories where either they make a metaphor, like violence against girls, into some kind of metaphor, or when they're talking about it explicitly, they just don't really seem to understand what violence is, or like how violence against girls is even like built into all of the layers of the social world that is like created and maintained, and what it's like to be like an angry girl within that, and a girl who has either experienced trauma or has not, but then like has, because like with Katza, she didn't experience the violence, but almost because she had to defend herself in the way that she did, like it has massively affected her, obviously. So yeah, I don't know, it was just like much more thoughtful than it kind of seems, even though it's also like quite derivative. There's also this other character who's like this kid, and I loved her so much. I won't talk about her much because she's like, she comes into play in the latter part of the book, but yeah, I just thought she was like wonderful, and like it was so nice to see her. And I also really thought that like the connection there between violence against all children, although she is a girl, was also part of it as well, and the experience of kind of being a girl as a form of objectification, but also within like the familial power dynamics. I feel like this isn't really making much sense, but anyway, I just thought it was, I thought it nailed a lot of like how it talked about and thought about violence, but wasn't like super triggering to me, which I also was nice, I guess. And I think, you know, it's the first in a series, and I think I will read the next one and kind of see how it goes from there. You know, I think honestly that like I'm going to be reading quite a lot of kids books in the next few months, because that's all I really have like capacity for. So I guess that's what I'll be doing. And it was good to finally finish this book this month. Let me know if you've read any of these. It's been very like series heavy, I guess. Aside from the Jewish like kids book and this one, they all seem to kind of have been in series, I guess. Okay, let me know if you have any thoughts on what I read or anything that I mentioned. I hope that you're having a nice day when you see this, and I will talk to you when I next talk to you. Bye!